So I hope that's not Poirot down the bottom. It's somebody masquerading as Poirot. And I think when the V&A had its Art Deco exhibition in 2003, it had the highest gate that they'd had to that point, pointing out, I think, that Art Deco is one of the most popular styles, if not the most popular style of the 20th century. Usually people prefer it to Art Nouveau. I think that's because, of course, it's associated very much with the Roaring Twenties, but also I think it's because people have got a better idea of what Art Deco is all about, because it is so clearly associated with characters like Agatha Christie's Poirot. And sort of generally, there's a legacy that has survived in terms of hotels and restaurants. So this is the front cover of the catalogue for the 2003 Art Deco exhibition. They had the Art Nouveau one in 2000 to celebrate its millennial moment. The useful thing about the front cover is it gives you the birth and death dates of Art Deco, 1910 to 1939. Though really, let's be truthful and say it's 1919 to 1939, because it is so incredibly influenced by the war itself. There was a sort of sense of joie de vivre in the 1920s, people trying to forget the horrors of the war. There was also that legacy that life was short and people wanted to live it to the full. So that whole sort of Great Gatsby vibe, I think, is very important. It emerges in the run-up to the war stylistically, but I think the spirit of Art Deco definitely kicks in once you get into the 1920s. So the front cover, as you can see, of the catalogue has not a racing car, but it's an Auburn Speedster, because speed is very much the theme of Art Deco. And although I'm not sure that I think it is an Auburn Speedster that we're looking at on the right-hand side. Can't read the label from here, but the important thing is it has Victoire, or the Spirit of the Wind, on the front of the car, which is by René Lalique. And that's, I think, another reason why Art Deco is so immensely popular. There are several brands and names like René Lalique that we immediately associate with the heyday of Art Deco. So more of car mascots later, and more of Poirot in just a minute. But how did Art Deco get its name? Well, it is perhaps a circuitous route. It wasn't known as Art Deco at the time. It takes its name from the exposition held in 1925 in Paris, Arts Décoratifs. This was shortened in the 1960s by scholars like Bevis Hillier to Art Deco. So it's Art Deco, meaning decoratif. Some people will call it Art Deco, which does rather infuriate me. I don't know why. It's one of those, just those niggles. So it's Art Deco, a shortening of Arts Décoratifs, the long title of the exposition held in Paris in 1925. And it was very much Paris that ruled the roost in 1925. The Germans were still recovering from the war, and America didn't participate, and England was very much involved in the Empire exhibitions held in 1924 and then again in 1925. So it's very much a style, I think, associated with Parisian life and luxury. So speed was fundamentally at the heart of Art Deco styling. So in the background here, we have a flying boat. Southampton, of course, was the main airport for flying boats, though it was all run from Croydon. More of that later as well. And then in front of it is the Gordon Miller Buick Auburn 851 Boattail Speedster, to give it its full name, which we started with on the first sheet of my presentation, 1925, but it's inspired by the sort of torpedo, bullet shape of the floats of the flying boat. So this is very much about fast boats, fast, well, I should say ships, fast cars, and perhaps not quite so fast, but certainly the new age of flight, which was something of a novelty. Now, I said that the style of Art Deco starts to emerge in the run up to the First World War. We can see it in the emergence of Cubism, because Art Deco will favour geometric forms, whereas Art Nouveau was all about the organic and deriving its style from nature. Art Deco is very much driven by geometric shapes, squares, circles and triangles, but also mechanical elements. So cogs, wheels, anything to do with machines. And in the case of the Italian futurists, I always joke that they took cubic forms from Braque and Picasso's Cubism, which emerges in 1907. They animate them, they sort of literally make them move, seen here in Umberto Boccioni's Dynamism of the Cyclist, which is 1913, and also they colour them, because if you know anything about the first flush of Cubism, it's very monochromatic. So this is Boccioni, and then coming over the top of this, I have Rossola's Dynamism of an Automobile, because these sort of speed lines, this whole idea of the object being in a wind tunnel and sort of seeing the air move, this is very much, I think, a feature of the whole Art Deco American take. The streamlining was very much going to be developed in America. And I suppose you could say that Art Deco, or modern as they called it at the time, is one of the very first instances that we can deliberately point to and say that the influences are coming from the other side of the Atlantic. It isn't just a European phenomenon. Art Deco is very much developed in America, specifically in New York and in Miami. Somehow Art Deco seems to be allied to leisure and pleasure, so very much seaside resorts. So, you know, I mentioned Bournemouth and Miami, Lyon Solent, and then, don't laugh, Frinton-on-Sea. You'll find these have all got really good iconic examples of Art Deco architecture. So here is where some of the influences are coming from. So the jazz element is the transatlantic influence. So I'm showing you here a Charleston dancer who is by Ferdinand Priest. And a lot of the figurines, which are so indicative of Art Deco, are illustrating showgirls. Again, that sort of joie de vivre element that I've spoken about. It was normally just referred to as modern, with either an E or not an E on the end. And the Carlton-ware jazz ginger jar, made of course in Stoke-on-Trent, was used by the V&A as one of their iconic Art Deco images. You can see here what I mean about geometric forms, but also these zigzags, like bolts of lightning, become very popular. Then my dancing girl, and then of course the transatlantic elements exemplified by the Normandy, the most luxurious of all the ocean liners, sadly lost, destroyed by fire in New York Harbour on the outbreak of the Second World War. Le Havre, Southampton and New York. And she of course was not just luxurious, she was also fast. She took the blue ribbon on several occasions. Now, you always think he's got a terribly difficult name to pronounce. Victor Schenkengost, hope that's sort of right. His famous punch bowl, for me, exemplifies the whole sort of ethos of Art Deco, the spirit of it in the post-war era, made for the Cowan pottery. It was initially a limited edition, commissioned by Eleanor Roosevelt for her husband, who was at that stage governor of New York, but it goes viral and is then produced, I won't say commercially, but was a luxury end of the market. You can see it has jazz very clearly written on it, the step profile of the skyscrapers, we have follies, we have dance, we have the ocean liners in the background. These are, you know, those stop and go signs that you get with roadworks. And then this is part of the set as it was developed. And there, as you can see, having their dancing, cocktails. So to me, this piece really exemplifies the sort of luxurious, pleasure-filled days of the 1920s. Because, of course, at the end of the 1920s, November 1929, we had the Depression. So I always think that Art Deco can be neatly divided into two phases. The 1920s, very much hedonistic, luxury and opulence. And then the 1930s, the Depression lasts a lot longer than we would have liked. Many countries never really recover from it. We have to wait till the war for economies to rebound. And modernism, with a capital M, and the influence of the Bauhaus really kicks in. It's much more utilitarian in the 1930s. Many of the most iconic skyscrapers were planned on the cusp. So this is the New Yorker by Morris Henry Sugarman. He was the architect in charge. It is pretty brutalist, as you can see. Unlike many other New York skyscrapers, it doesn't really have a lot of terracotta decoration. As you can see, it is just a mass of concrete. But I'm very fond of it because it does have that exemplary ziggurat or stepped profile, which you can see in City Lights by Raymond Johnson. And the reason for the stepped profile was simply zoning. Around about 1913, 1914, a New York law was passed that said the skyscrapers had to be stepped back in this manner, otherwise you'd get no light filtering down to pavement level at all. And it gives you this almost sort of pyramidal shape at the top. The iconic New Yorker sign right at the very top of the building. You can see it all over the city when it's lit up at night. And when I go to New York, this is always where I stay. It's not grand. It has a fantastic diner, the TikTok diner, and it's right next to the Empire State Building. It's a wonderful position close to Broadway. So I would definitely recommend the New Yorker. So even more iconic, of course, is the Chrysler Building. And this brings us back to cars. It wasn't originally commissioned by the Chrysler Company. They took it over. And there was quite a lot of shilly-shallying with the architect William Van Allen. So it was built between 1928 and 1931. Chrysler didn't want just a skyscraper. He wanted something completely different. He wanted something that would pierce the sky. And so the amazing spire was built inside the top of the building, and then it appeared one morning like a rabbit out of a hat. Again, as a wonderful piece of advertising for the Chrysler Company. It's got one or two outstanding details. Of course, these are supposed to be overlapping car tires at the top. You know, the plates, the silver plates that you put on your tires. And then I'm showing you a close-up of one of the eagle heads, again, because you're making that link between flight and speed. And then this is almost like a car mascot on the front, isn't it? Again, but the winged elements are emphasizing speed. So wherever we're looking at, whatever we're looking at in terms of cars and planes and ships, the element of speed is frequently emphasized. So jumping to cars. So here is a Chrysler Imperial. I love that dual windscreen Phaeton. You notice how they take Greek names. And the dual windscreen is because even the passengers at the back had something to protect them from the elements. I chose these two because I love the colours. And also, as you can see, wonderful examples of the car mascots on the front. You know, you have gazelles, you have dogs like greyhounds. Of course, when we get to René Lalique in a minute, also a menagerie that you can have for your car mascot. Probably the most famous car mascot of all is not Art Deco, it's pre-First World War. Spirit of Ecstasy, which you see on the front of a Rolls Royce, was designed by Charles Robinson Sykes and was allegedly based on the woman he loved. Though I think it looks rather like Isadora Duncan, or even more like Loie Fuller with her wonderful flowing robes. And on the front of the Chrysler, we're back to my leaping gazelle. So it doesn't matter whether it's a gazelle or a deer, or sometimes it's an impala. The important thing is that you have like an animal that's leaping. It was the logo of Paris 1925, the leaping deer. Susie Cooper took the deer or the gazelle as her logo. So again, it's even nature exemplifying the idea of speed. And as you can see, our gazelle is leaping out of some wings. So that's one of the important, again, ways in which speed was represented. Now, I know, ladies, we like to colour coordinate and match our surroundings in both Art Nouveau and Art Deco, but I think Sonia Delaunay was taking it a little too far. She was married, of course, and they're both involved in the development of Orphism, both of the Delaunays, which was this idea of making a correlation between colour and sound. But Sonia particularly develops a very, almost like a William Morris attitude to encompassing all the arts. So fashion in particular becomes a key way in which Sonia Delaunay expresses her new Cubist style. So let's put some colour in for you, because here's one of her designs below, really emphasising the cubic forms, but also this wonderful harmony of different colours. So I think, as you can see, Sonia's taking it a little too far here, in that she's actually completely matching her car. And the coat that you're looking at in the centre here is pretty quite close to the one down below. And Sonia was the sort of first to develop the idea of the boutique. She had a boutique at Paris 1925. I loved the poster from America, Service for Everybody, because it sort of gives you a sort of completely different idea of the aspirations of women in the 1920s. They're driving cars, not just sitting in them. They have their own disposable income. And I like the fact that the little girl is driving around in her pedal car and is looking up to the woman behind her, thinking, when I grow up, I'll have one of those. So women are very important in Art Deco because of this new ways in which women have entered the consumer age, their new freedoms. Of course, it's the era of the flapper. So here is Paris 1925. There's my leaping deer or gazelle, which is on the becomes the logo on the front cover of the exposition, International Arts Decoratif and Industriel, where we get Art Deco, but please note the moderne down the bottom, which is really how it was referred to at the time. The American style, the modern style, the Jazz Age style, but Art Deco as a term is quite recent. The Eiffel Tower was relocated or repositioned as an advert for Citroën, and the 5CV was, of course, the car that we particularly associate with Citroën. And this is the metal version of their car mascot, with 5 overlapping horses. Yes, you've got the pun for 5CV. But of course, the iconic version of it is in glass by René Lalique. And if you think about the idea of a glass mascot on a car, it's really rather bizarre, isn't it? In the sense that you'd have thought they didn't have a very long life, and I think that's probably very true. But then remember that car speeds were considerably lower than they are today. And if I remember correctly, in Wolverhampton, you could get a ticket for speeding if you went over about 5 miles an hour. Obviously, things have changed. So many of the car mascots relate either to speed or to masculinity. So Longchamp, of course, is the famous racetrack in France. Sanglier is the boar, so that's that whole sort of masculine vibe. There are around about 29, 30 designs. They're introduced in the mid-1920s, but they really keep Lalique going through the tough years of the Depression. They're turned into bookends and car mascots. And there's the full range, as you can see, at the top, with Victoire, or the spirit of the wind, to either side, perhaps the most famous, and 2 of the rarest, the fox. You'll see that better in a minute. So I love the colour of the peacock. He's almost, well, peacock blue. And then there's this legend about the eagle that much later Hitler's generals all acquired one of these. But there is this, link between these eagle car mascots and the image of the Nazi general. Perhaps again, it's just that whole idea of masculinity. And you can also see some Art Nouveau themes, because René Lalique was very fond of dragonflies, and that makes the transition a la René Lalique from Art Nouveau to Art Deco as a car mascot. Again, you see what I mean here about the rather bizarre idea of having something as fragile as this on the front of your car. So here is a Packard, which I photographed, believe it or not, on South Island in New Zealand, car museum. I couldn't resist the wonderful combination of this big American car and then the French cockerel on the front, courtesy of René Lalique. And you can also see here how they screw into the front of the car. Of course, as ever, naked women always do better than anything else. And so we have here Vitesse and Crisis. And Crisis can also be acquired, as you can see, in Opulence. But the main thing here is that I'm showing you that you could attach your car mascot to a dynamo, which meant that as you were driving along, your car mascot got brighter and brighter, glowed more and more in the dark, the faster that you drove. Perhaps not such a good idea today with all of those speed traps out there. So here is Tamara de Lempicka. She represents to me all that is chic and very much the new woman, fiercely independent, of a Russian emigre, reinvents herself in Paris, is often described as a feminist artist, is certainly sort of linked to the slightly risque relationships that were formed in Paris in the 1920s. She's sometimes referred to as a lesbian. Anyway, she's very much a modern woman. She also is able to take those avant-garde styles, Cubism, Orphism, which we've met with Sonia Delaunay, and Futurism, and blend them into something popularist, as you can see here. And I'm going to bring the spirit of the wind over her. So this is that Auburn Speedster again, and here is Victoire coming on the end, because to my mind that exemplifies everything that I think of as Art Deco, the geometric styling and the whole metamorphosis of the human figure to become an icon of speed. One of the rarest of the car mascots, perhaps it just didn't fill the brief properly, is Renard the fox. And as you can see, an example of this made a really incredible amount of money. And then down below it is a hibou, who is the owl. And these two are much rarer. But again, I think probably because they didn't quite exemplify the styling that Victoire does, which, by the way, you can still buy as a reproduction. In America, streamlining was very much linked to this whole idea of speed and the car. And so here on an American diner, you remember I mentioned at the New Yorker, there is an exemplary American diner called the TikTok. This is Jim's Steaks. Here is my Scalextric track, as I like to refer to it. And these look almost like the funnels of an ocean liner. The radio by Walter Darwin Teague of 1936, as you can see, is in the form of a radiator. So they're constantly making references. And you've got the streamlining here, particularly coming through where the edges are literally knocked off. This is General Motors. This is the ramp. Once the cars were finished, they come down this ramp and out of the factory. But again, it's that shape that I think is really interesting, the shape of the ramp itself that you're seeing here, which clearly sort of relates to a modern Scalextric track. If you put that sideways on the front of my diner, you can see it's that figure of 8 shape. So this is the way in which designers tried to build in the theme of speed into their designs. Now, we're lucky when we go to Turin that we actually visit one of these state-of-the-art new car factories. This is the Lingotta Fiat factory, built during the war, 1916 to 1923, with its famous helix ramp. So they use this, of course, in the Italian job. You can see this is the race. Well, it's not a racetrack per se, it's where the cars were tested. So everything was built upwards and then tested on the roof of the Lingotta factory. And then they come down this ramp, rather like the General Motors one, but more compact. And these are the two ramps at either ends of the Lingotta. And Scott put this together for me. That was a bit of fun. And trying to bring you back some of the atmosphere. So this is Brooklands, one of the, I think often said to be the first racetrack. I love the way the car isn't even attached to the surface of the ramp. But down the bottom, Brooklands is just outside London. Down the bottom, we've got Earl Howell sitting in a DeLange GP, Brooklands, 1931. If you're into Formula One, you'll notice a little bit how the cars have changed. This, of course, is Bewley, that you can see there, the sign for it in the background, the Motor Museum there. And this is Malcolm Campbell's Bluebird before he took to the water. They're called Bluebirds, by the way, both the cars and the boats, in honour of Maurice Maeterlinck's fairy story of the Bluebird. And the Bluebird is also very much associated with happiness. So that is why they are Bluebirds, both cars and boats, associated with Malcolm Campbell's desire to go as fast as was humanly possible. So obviously it has a streamlined rear. They look rather like a torpedo. And I don't think I fancy driving this one at all, as it's got an aircraft engine in it. So this is again photographed at the Brooklands Museum. It's a Napier Railton, as you can see, built in 1933. But it's a really good example of the aerodynamics of American streamlining. So McKnight Kauffer is my favourite of the poster designers of the 1920s and 30s. And at Bewley, we have the Shell collection of posters. They're not on display, but they have the archive there. This is Aero Shell. So it looks like he's in one of those Napier Railtons shooting along. And this is an advert, obviously, for oil. And one of my favourites by McKnight Kauffer is Stonehenge. So this was our whole series encouraging motorists. Of course, we're doing the exact opposite now, aren't we? But this was pleasure driving. So you'd go out at the weekend and you would discover Britain. There was books were published to give you sort of routes for pleasure driving. And my grandfather had a Wolsey, which we would regularly take out at the weekend, a bit like taking a dog out for a run. And we would go out for a leisure or pleasure drive. Gosh, things have changed now. Mostly when we get in the car, it's more of a penance, isn't it? Because we fear how many traffic jams we're going to sit in. So this is, I really love this one. The New Forest, it doesn't really encourage you, does it, to visit? It looks incredibly sinister. But see the catchphrase down the bottom. See Britain first on Winter Shell. And then these really rather daunting trees. But it's a really powerful poster by McKnight Kauffer. So I mentioned the Wolseys. I loved my grandfather's Wolsey because the door went the other way round. Do you remember when they don't open the way they do now, they open the other way, and it was much easier to get in and out. So here is the archetypal Wolsey. Originally Vickers planes in conjunction with Herbert Austin, but then brought up by William Morris. Now that's not my William Morris, that is William Morris, Lord Nuffield. I often get comments. People think that they're both the same man, and I do point out that their birth and death dates are somewhat different. But I can never resist saying, if I'm feeling really cheeky, you know, that yes, William Morris developed the Morris Minor that has the timber framing, you know, because it had a certain arts and craft charm. That's when I'm being really naughty. Anyway, as I say, my own reminiscences, not quite that model, I'm afraid, of my grandfather's Wolsey, and also reminiscences of the famous showroom, which is just next to the Ritz in Piccadilly. Designed by William Curtis Green, 1921 to 1926. I think it emphasises what I was saying about the luxury and opulence. This was a car showroom in central London in the mid-1920s. This is what it looked like originally. This is an artist's wonderfully evocative image of it as a car showroom. I love the Roman splendour, you know, the columns. The light fittings have been reproduced. In fact, if I just quickly go back to it, you can see here that it was operating as a restaurant, and they've refitted it, even reproducing the original light fittings that you can see here in this period black and white illustration. So there are plenty of places that you can find Art Deco in London, but you do have to leg it a bit. There isn't an Art Deco section. The Art Deco buildings are rather spread thinly across London, but I picked this one out, the former Daimler Hire Company. I like the idea that you could hire a Daimler. Wallace Gilbert and Partners, very famous Art Deco into modernist architectural office. And this is actually very close to Russell Square Tube Station, literally just one road back. So when we go to visit the Art Workers Guild and we go to Great Russell Square, to, you know, on the tube station to Russell Square, you'll see as you're sort of coming out, turning left and going towards the square, if you look right, you'll see it there with this very distinctive, almost like pork pie, circular drum shape at the end here, and this rather wonderful staircase with this vertical window, and then those very obvious speed lines right at the top. And speed lines, again, I think are absolutely indicative of Art Deco styling. So if you can't afford a car, you might have to make do with a bus. So this is Victoria Coach Station. I know you might not have thought of that as exemplary Art Deco architecture. These are the speed lines, the rounding of the corners, which is typical Art Deco. This tower in the centre with its step profile. This is Wallace, Gilbert and Partners again. You know, we've just seen them do the Daimler Art Hire Room. And I couldn't resist sort of comparing it to this, which are the famous Sadler's racing car teapots, and the bus down the bottom that we think actually probably is 1940s in date. So I love the fact that you can have, it's like Noddy and Big Ears almost on here. So our character has been stopped by the policeman who's asking for the license, but in fact these are associated with Mabel Lucy Atwell. So again, it's quite an interesting sort of crossover. And I like the way that the driver's wearing the cloche and the goggles, you know, for the whole idea of speed and no windshield. So moving underground and to trains, this is Frank Pick, who's often seen to be at the heart of the styling for the underground. He was the first chief executive officer of the London Passenger Transport Board, better known to us as the Tube. And there's a memorial to him. We're looking at it here at Piccadilly Circus. This is where I photographed. Of course, that's this distinctive logo for the Tube. And I stuck with Edward and McKnight Kauffer, to my mind, one of the exemplary poster designers of the era. So these two are for 1931 and 1932. That's Battersea Power Station at the back, this wonderful arm coming out, like it's sort of like a cog almost, but then the zigzags, the lightning strikes down the bottom, and the way that the calligraphy is very powerful, the nerve centre of London's underground, and then again sort of emphasising the whole sort of lifestyle of the 1920s and 30s, this whole sort of new idea of pleasure and mobility. So 6 and 12 are the bright hours for play. So you can see here play, and then play between 6 and 12, which were the hours, of course, that the new underground ran. You know, social mobility and a whole sort of like opening up of social life in the 1930s, in this case, 1930, the date of the poster. So this is not designed for the Tube. Many people think it is. They even think it's designed for a plane or, you know, an airline. This is McKnight Kauffer's wonderful image of soaring birds, but in fact they're soaring to success for the Daily Herald. And then the Alan Rogers one on the other side from 1930s, just to introduce the fact that there was a whole stable of artists designing posters, very dramatic posters, as you can see, where we have the arrow, again for speed, and we have the angular forms, a little bit like Fernand Léger here, adapted to an Art Deco poster. He was the famous French late Cubist. That's Léger. So the actual stations themselves, the principal architect is Charles Holden. In Leicester, we have a building like this, and we call it the Pork Pie Library for obvious reasons. But these very simple geometric shapes and those sort of wonderfully, well, the fenestration makes a big difference, doesn't it? Sort of those wonderful rectangles, this interlocking at Arnos Grove of geometric forms becomes exemplary of the new Art Deco architecture. Southgate Tube Station, also Charles Holden, to me looks like a spaceship that's landed, particularly with this aerial element here in the centre. And this is the original, I don't think it's there anymore, unfortunately. This is the original signage for the underground, which again has a sort of slightly futuristic, doesn't it, sort of spaceship feel to it, particularly when it's lit up. It looks even more like a spaceship. And this is still has, I think they've been modernized because the original escalators are wooden, but it still has its original lighting and tiles. So you get a good idea, really, if you visit Southgate Tube Station, of an Art Deco vibe. Now, I've taken you to East Finchley, not so much because of the architecture, but because of the sculpture of the archer on the corner by Eric Aumonier. Here he is. Again, it's a sort of, he has an Egyptian feel to him, or sort of primitive, as a sort of, remember Tutankhamun is excavated in 1922, but there's also sort of South American element here somehow going on. It's sort of a blending of primitive art forms to produce this dramatic image of the archer, which we also saw in that earlier advert poster. And so speed and trains very much go together in terms of their styling. So in America, the most famous of the speed trains is the Burlington Zephyr. You see how they take names that sort of conjure this image of speed and streamlining. I think they look a little menacing, don't they? This is America's first diesel streamlined train from 1934. And this is one which was developed for Australia, which, like America, has vast distances to cover. So when it says here, Victorian Railways present, it means the Victoria as in the state in Australia. Matthew Flinders, and then the Spirit of Progress. But I think you'll agree that, again, they're quite menacing looking machines, aren't they? I love the way that this area here is blurred to make you feel as though the wheels are really turning. So here, streamlining, really emphasizing in America, streamlining. You can see it through all the names that they choose, like the Comet here that went between Boston and Providence. There's a surviving Zephyr locomotive in the Smithsonian in Washington, and it only recently went out of service the Coast Starlight Observation Car, which was a transcontinental railway. And all of these luxury lines were suffering even before COVID hit us. So this is, I'm afraid, no longer in service. But I love the way that you could get almost like a panoramic view as you were traveling along in the dining car. The most famous posters are by Cassandra, French ones for the railways. Nord Express, Chemin de Fer du Nord, London, Brussels, Riga. What a lovely idea. I'd like to get to Riga, for Wagonly. And they were the equivalent of the Pullman, remember? The Pullmans are England, and then they come originally from America. And the interesting thing here is the Nord Express one at the top, and this is London and Midland Railway. And these were rejected. So these are two of Cassandra's most desirable posters because they were never put into production. He was so proud of the design that he printed 50 of these to sell as a commodity. And they make a fortune at auction because they did not go into mass production. So there was a version for the Nord Express and a version for the London and the Midland. See the initials here, Best Way. And why did they fail? Well, we think probably they were just simply too abstract. You're looking at the wheels again of the train, whereas the Nord Express poster, which is one of the iconic images of the Art Deco era, you have that interplay between the speed. Look at the speed here, like the movement of the air, and these are the telegraph wires. It's as though the train and the telegraph wires are racing each other. So that's Cassandra. His protege was Pierre-Fix Marceau, who began his career as an Art Nouveau sculptor, but then moved completely sideways into the world of posters, which were incredibly lucrative in the 1920s. Exactitude actually translates as precision, and was his most famous poster for the French state railways, Etat. You can see it here at the ends, and it's arrived on time, as you can see from the clock in the background. And again, the idea of the airstream moving around the train was to really emphasize this idea of movement. And here we've got the Côte d'Azur Pullman Express. And when the Venice Simplon Orient Express was relaunched in the 1980s, I think it was, but the main thing is that they were able to go back to Pierre-Fix Marceau, who does not die until 1994, to reinvent himself. So he went back to his original Art Deco style and produced this range of modern posters for the Venice Simplon Orient Express, which are now, of course, collectible in their own right. So here is the Orient Express. I did have a look at it and think perhaps I should plunge in and, as a special treat, have a go. It certainly is all about getting there. It's about the experience of travelling on the Orient Express. So originally it's initiated in 1883 with the wonderfully named Belgian entrepreneur Georges Nagelmakers. Hope I'm pronouncing that sort of right. So he likes the idea of the Pullman train. Pullman won't franchise to America, no, it's an American company. So Compagnie Internationale de Wagenlit is set up in the spirit of the Pullman. The last full journey was 1977, but you can still go on it. It's just that it's more of a tourist experience in its own right. So this is one of the cars. This is one of the grand suites. There's about 3 or 4 of these. And I just chose this one because it's the most overtly Art Deco with its shell-shaped light fittings. And that, as you can see, comes complete with all of your trappings. Evidently, if you book one of these suites, you just drink champagne the whole way to Istanbul. However, it's the René Lalique element that's important for me. So one of the so-called smoking cars has got panels that look almost like glass crystals by René Lalique. These date to the 1930s. Even more fetching, and I love the fact that you get a René Lalique ice bucket for your perpetual. So you know how other companies offer you refillable Coca-Cola, it never stops. On the Orient Express, it's refillable champagne that never stops in a René Lalique ice bucket. And the panels here of backhands, how apt for the bar, are of course again courtesy of René Lalique. So he completely pushes glass panels into a new dimension in architecture. By comparison, the Great Northern Belmont British Pullman, who the sister of the Venice Simplon Orient Express, not quite so luxurious, but it's still with us. And again, you can still travel on it as a tourist experience. It was decommissioned and all the carriages sold off. There were 15 sold. One turned up in a garden being used as a sort of outhouse. But they've been restored, and for a considerable sum of money, you can have the full Porro experience. So a contemporary photograph of what the Doris carriage looks like now. I particularly liked it because it's got the rising sun Art Deco motif. This is the Vera carriage, which I chose because we've got the leaping deer. And again, the idea is that you dine on board. This is for the Brighton Belle, yes, as in the film. And then we've got a series here. This is Zena, a very sort of like stylized Art Deco fountain motif. This is Lucille. All the carriages have names. Again, it's all about dining. This again, a very obvious Art Deco motif here. And this is Ibis, which has these really rather lovely sort of dancing backhands in a neoclassical style. Now, this particular carriage had quite a long life on the Golden Arrow, and then became the Cunard boat train. Oh, those halcyon days from 1952 to 1963, which very conveniently introduces Cunard. So here we have the Queen Mary arriving in New York, very famous image with her 3 funnels. Here she is, not a bit sad now, isn't she, at Long Beach with a Russian submarine in front of her, which again I found totally incongruous. Got a Russian flag on the front as well, or a Soviet flag. She's now a hotel, and ironically they sold a lot of the original contents to sort of pay for her refit, which is catch-22, isn't it? She's used for a lot of filming. Anyway, here is me and Scott in the observation bar, you'll be pleased to know. Aluminium as far as the eye can see, and this wonderful mural at the end of the observation lounges commemorating the Royal Jubilee Week by Alfred R. Thompson. And it was George V and Queen Mary's Jubilee. And it's sort of like through the ages, people dancing, drinking and enjoying themselves, which is what we were doing. As you can see, everybody else photographing the interior of the observation lounge, which were the best surviving sections of the Queen Mary. Lighting is a really important way that Art Deco brings its unique style as the whole drama of Art Deco. So these planters were originally in one of the first class lounges. And my particular interest in ocean liners goes down to the ceramics. So believe it or not, I published a book about cube teapots. It doesn't work so well when you have a conventional pattern. They look better when they're plain, but that was the pattern used on the Mauritania. And then they're very strange, as you can see, as they have no spout and the handle is built in. And they were used extensively in the 1930s, not just on ocean liners, but also railways, because they were easy to stack. You wouldn't break, as you can see in the advert, the spout or the handle. So that is my contribution to Art Deco ceramics. So here we are serving tea on the Queen Mary. You could get a baker-like tray, and all of your tea wares fit on the tray beautifully. So here they all are. This is the classic, quite simple designs that were evolved for the Queen Mary. Just lines of grey and a sort of ochre colour, but everything is square, as you can see, apart from the cup and saucer. That may be something of a relief. And that's the front cover of my book. I got embroiled with this because, believe it or not, the cubic teapot comes from Leicester, which rather ironically is about the furthest point inland in England away from the sea. Back to the Normandy, which is undoubtedly the most beautiful of the ships. And it's quite interesting that, you know, the Normandy was planned on the cusp of the Depression. The Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth right in the middle of it. They had to be completed, in fact, by a loan from the British government. Cunard and White Star had to conjoin in order to fulfill the brief of the loan. And it was all to do with regenerating industry and manufacturing. And in fact, the very opulent interiors for the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth that were planned were scaled back. The owners were worried, Cunard, White Star, that people would be put off by the opulence of the ship, which is what happened with the Normandy. It was so opulent that people felt that they weren't really worthy of travelling in her. So she very rarely ever sailed at full capacity. This is Cassandra's, again, wonderful image for the Normandy. And I just love the opalescent clock. That sort of is a rip-off of the design. And it was René Lalique who designed many of the magnificent light fittings for the Normandy. So here we have an artist's rendering of the first class lounge, and the wall decorations were very colonial, like far-flung places that you would visit. And this is a contemporary photograph. I particularly like the sort of round doofy embroidery on the chairs. Another view of it, just showing you these amazing vases. You know, we have those in the Queen Mary as well. For the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth, Dalton was involved, commissioned to produce figures. They were by a chap called Skeeping, leaping deer, polar bears, all sorts of different animals. So these were really seen as, again, an alliance of art and industry in terms of their fitting out. And then this is going down slightly. This is the cafe grill for the so-called cabin passengers. So remember, it was very stratified in terms of first, second and third class. But these, again, illuminated columns and the use of metal in furniture as pioneered by the Bauhaus. Anyway, for the first class passengers, much more opulent. It goes on into infinity, as you can see, and beyond, with these wonderful, again, panels to either side that remind me of the ones for the Express building. But here are the light fittings, again, by René Lalique. And you can see towers of them. As you can see, there's a whole row of them here. And the ceiling light fittings are equally impressive. And some of these pop up on the market. Flying. So one of the reasons why the ships start to decline is, of course, the competition coming from flying. So this is Imperial Airways building on Buckingham Palace Road, 1939. Croydon Airport is their base rather than Heathrow, and Southampton docks for the flying boats. Albert Lakeman is the architect. It's now the National Audit Office, but I couldn't resist showing you this wonderful globe and these sort of Victoire figures, you know, to either side, those speed lines. I love these adverts. Look, Imperial Airways, London, Cairo. Again, this is the logo. It looks a bit like that night count of a bird, but it's also like just a zigzag. I love the idea of London to Sydney in just 10 days. I thought 27 hours was long enough. And the Sydney Harbour with the flying boats, and again, another link to Shell. Yes, here's when the map was pink, or in fact red. India, Australia, Imperial Airways, map of Empire Air Routes. Okay, probably not PC, but I thought just to remind you that it was originally Imperial Airways, it then becomes BOAC, then British European Airways, and now just British Airways. Croydon was seen to be the new New York. Yeah, not quite really, is it? But never mind. I love the poster. This is what it looks like today. It's a bit of survived as a hotel, but obviously the actual runway is no longer there. But you can see this tower here on the poster, and the plane in the foreground. So Croydon, England's New York. And obviously after traveling, what you need to do is to recover in a hotel. So my last little section is very much about luxury living in a hotel. So the Savoy was originally developed by D'Oyly Carte. It has the theatre on this side, and then it was redeveloped by Thomas Edward Colcott. It was Arthur Haygate McMurdo who gave it its river frontage with lots of balconies. Very important for Monet. He stands on that balcony to paint the Thames, and Whistler also has rooms in the Savoy. So the balcony side is overlooking the river, but Colcott sort of redeveloped the front of it here, this sort of iconic entrance to the Savoy, with the famous sign by Howard Robertson in aluminium dating to 1929, and immediately in front of it, the Lalique fountain of leaping fish. And there's a recent party at the Savoy where I think they claimed they had gin flowing out of it, which is rather a nice idea. The Savoy's interiors are really Edwardian opulence, very obviously neoclassical. It was closed about 10 years ago for a massive refit. Ironically, again, like the Queen Mary at Long Beach, they sold a lot of the original Art Deco fittings. Seemed to me to be a bit of a sort of game catch-22. But here's Singer Sargent, you on the walls. So this main entrance, this is the reception area, to me is Edwardian opulence. But then Basil Ionides was brought in to redecorate in the 1930s. A lot of the private rooms have got D'Oyly Carte names. This is Pinafore. And you can see that this was actually used by Winston Churchill for cabinet meetings during the Second World War. And you might have heard that you could, like many London restaurants, you can't have 13 dining at the Savoy. So if there are 13 of you, you have Casper the cat. He's at the top here, designed by Basil Ionides, who will be seated at your table, often with a napkin round his neck, to make you up to 14. On one infamous occasion, when 13 dined and people said it was very bad luck, and somebody scoffed, his name was Wolf, and said, oh, nothing will happen to me. And literally a few weeks later, he died. And this is how, he was killed in fact, this is how the sort of legend of Casper the cat was born. If you've been to visit the Savoy, Casper is also cut into the topiary at the front of the hotel. So a lot of the Savoy is not what you think it is. It's actually a modern refit. So this is the Beaufort bar, which is evocative of Art Deco styling, as you can see, and rather neoclassical in many of its decorative features. So the things that got sold off, yes, the irony of it all, icons of British modernity, the Savo lounge chair by Betty Joel. Now she's from Hayling Island, but her factory was just outside Kingston. She worked with her husbands, but really she was the driving force. She is responsible for providing an entire design range. So, you know, she was literally could produce for you an integrated interior in which everything was harmonious. But she's best known, I think, for her Savoy tray or trolley, which you see here. So the chair, not that opulent and certainly not that well made, but the trolley is absolutely iconic. I tried to buy one of these until I realized just how large it is. And then Alvar Aalto, the famous Finnish architect, supplies the Savoy vases, which you can still buy today. They're made by Itala. And then one of my favourite eating holes in London, near Piccadilly, is now Brasserie Zedel, but it was once one of the largest hotels in the world, the Regent Palace Hotel, built by Lions, as in Lions corner houses, and I could easily have strayed into those in terms of Art Deco styling. The four corners of London, the famous Lions corner houses. It was in a Beaux-Arts style when it was built, so again, sort of like historicist, but with a very opulent interior. Opens in 1915, and as you can see, with over 1,000 bedrooms. This is what it looks like now, fitted out. So this is the original restaurant, stripped of all its fittings, with these wonderful, again, faux marble columns, and what it looks like today as Zedel's. And here's the grill room of the Regent Palace Hotel as it looked. And you've got to go underground to find all of these. So do a bit of Googling before you set off. And there's a lovely bar, by the way, at street level. This is all underground, which is probably how it survived. Zedel's has this wonderful entrance, as you can see. You almost feel that you are on a ship. You've got all these references to airships and flying boats, the sort of whole progress. You've got London on one side, you've got New York on the other. And this is designed, this refits, because remember that hotel is originally Edwardian. Oliver Percy Bernard, who was very much a key player in English Art Deco, as he did much of the designing at Paris 1925. This is the entrance to the Shea Cup cocktail bar, the Titanic restaurant, the Atlantic bar, and the wonderfully named Dick's bar, as you can see from all the headings. Here's a slightly better view of the flying boats and New York. So here is the new cocktail bar, the Shea Cup. I presume it's a pun, Shea Cup, but also very French sounding, because of course we think of all those sort of like luxuries coming from Paris. Just a trifle dissipated and naughty, but not sufficiently so to be vulgar, was how it is described at the time. The incredibly mannered, with all its black and white interior. 1934 was carved out of the former billiard room. It still functions, it's been totally revamped, but it's rather private. You've got to book in, even before COVID. It's now the Crazy Coq's cabaret and bar. I think the Crazy Coq's, again, the French element. This is the Titanic restaurant. I've never quite known why people would want to call anything Titanic after what happened to the Titanic. But you can see here again how important lighting is in these Art Deco interiors, and the use of mirrors to create that sense of space. The most dramatic lighting of all is the entrance to the Strand Palace Hotel, which is no more. We have got a section of it here that's been reconstructed in a modern hotel on the site of the Strand Palace, but the elements themselves were recovered and stored in the V&A, but they don't have any space for it, obviously, and only a section of it was reconstructed in 2003. It's Oliver Bernard again. So this is the architect involved in our submission to Paris 1925. I love this, again, all the lighting all the way through, you know, very dramatic, as is the lighting here. You can't see it, it's coming up here, the staircases to either side of the Sheraton Park Lane Hotel. Now this is top of Piccadilly, so just above the Ritz, and on the opposite side, a stunning entrance to the ballroom, where again I think you see what I mean about blending in primitive art forms, archaic Greek, neoclassical, Egyptian elements. It all comes together, but with very modern materials, aluminium, and most importantly the dramatic lighting. Right, so a little more down market, but I thought I would end up with some really iconic Art Deco hotels. So this is the Midland Hotel, Morecambe Bay, by Oliver Hill. So like Bernard, he's one of our chief Art Deco modernist architects. This is the solarium. This is Morecambe Bay, remember. This is the solarium at the end. And I think you'll agree that these buildings look very much like ocean liners that have somehow got stuck on land with their galleries and walkways. And a lot of the decoration throughout the Midland Hotel is nautical, as you might imagine. Wonderful mosaics on the front of the building, dolphins. So again, there are the seahorses there right at the top. A lot of fun. Burr Island, this is where I really want my husband to take me for some anniversary. Burr Island inspired 2 novels by Agatha Christie, one of which I can't pronounce the name of because we're not allowed to anymore, so I think you can guess which one I'm referring to. But it's a tour de force of Art Deco styling. In fact, some of it reuses paneling from one of the ocean liners. I think it's the Mauritania. You have to get to it using a sort of special contraption, like a giant tractor, because it's on an island, but like Mont Saint-Michel, you know, the tide goes out and this big tractor takes you across. And this is the stepped profile of the building. Here, again, the rather Egyptian ornament to either side of the staircase, but I particularly love the giant here domed roof. So architect Matthew Dawson, and originally it was invitation only. Archibald Nettlefold, the theatrical impresario, who commissioned it. And then finally, the Waldorf Astoria. This is not its original site, but where it moves to in 1931, which was the tallest and largest hotel in the world when it was completed. I think when you go to visit it, and I have, you don't quite realise how tall it is, with those double spires to either side. And again, it was closed in 2017 for a massive refit, but fortunately it was listed just in time. So the principal receptions have got to stay in style. And in fact, there's even a museum now devoted to its original 1930s opulence. So this is it, with the clock in the center, which is a really weird contraption, a legacy of the Chicago World Fair of 1893, and celebrating the special relationship, you'll be pleased to know, between Britain and America. But you can see here what I mean really about Art Deco neoclassical opulence. And this is it in 2017, just before it was closed for its refit. But don't worry, as far as I'm aware, most of that has got to stay. So returning to my own musings about Art Deco, when I was a child, a special treat was to go to Kensington High Street to go shopping. There was Barker's and Derry and Tom's. Barker's actually bought out Derry and Tom's. And so it was the chairman of Barker's, Trevor Bowen, who actually planned the famous rooftop garden. So I'm cheating here a little bit, in the sense that this is a department store rather than a restaurant or a hotel. But to my mind, this is one of the most wonderful Art Deco ensembles in England, and I just hope it has survived. It was acquired on a long lease by Mr. Branson of Virgin fame, and operated as a restaurant. Babylon was one of my favourites, which was created out of the Sun Pavilion that you see here. And it's the sort of frivolity, I think, of Art Deco that particularly, I think, appeals here. This was, you know, it's the most famous rooftop garden in the world, let's be honest. It was composed of the Tudor garden, the Spanish garden, which I'm showing you here down the bottom, the Court of Fountains, which was inspired by the Alhambra. There's an entire orchard at one end. And as you famously know, if you're a Londoner, it had flamingos. When it became beaver, the flamingos legendarily became penguins who left the building. But again, I think that's another wonderful urban legend. So I'm showing you here the Spanish garden. So there we are. Just to remind you that you can always get in touch with me via my email address, and.anderson99@talk21. And you can get my Cube Teapot book, which is all about China at sea, all at sea with China. I rather like that idea, sorry. It's on my Amazon page, and it's published by Richard Dennis. It's not very expensive. I don't think it's even a tenner. Anyway, you might enjoy it if you like ships and China. Thank you.